Daniel Hayes was once the town's most trusted cop until a young man's mysterious death exposed a web of lies, missing evidence, and a police department built on silence and fear. Officer Daniel Hayes had built his entire career on the image of dedication, loyalty, and spotless integrity. Around town, he was known as the cop who showed up at every community meeting and shook hands with every shop owner. It came as a shock when Marcus Bell, a soft-spoken grocery store clerk, was discovered lifeless behind a decrepit warehouse on the outskirts of town. The police quickly labeled it a failed drug deal, mentioning non-existent addictions and a hidden criminal lifestyle. The case was signed off in record time, leaving the public with only an official statement and no chance to ask questions. What the town didn't know was that Marcus had reportedly visited the police station just days earlier, attempting to file a complaint against Officer Hayes. According to a janitor who claimed to overhear hushed conversations, Marcus had shown disturbing bruises and accused Hayes of threatening him during a routine traffic stop. Oddly, no trace of that complaint could be found when Amy Carson, a local journalist, began making inquiries. Police logs listed no entry under Marcus's name that entire month, as if he never stepped inside the building. Behind the scenes, whispers suggested that Marcus wasn't the first person who tried blowing the whistle. Another citizen named Eleanor Davis had filed a misconduct report against Hayes 2 months earlier, claiming unlawful entry into her home without a warrant. Her report also vanished, erased from the system with no backup record. People close to Eleanor said she withdrew the complaint after allegedly receiving late-night phone calls from blocked numbers and noticing unfamiliar vehicles parked near her house. Still, Officer Hayes continued wearing his polished badge, praised by superiors and protected by bureaucratic layers of approval. Marcus's funeral was small and quiet, attended only by close relatives who were too frightened to demand further investigation. Meanwhile, Hayes calmly patrolled the streets as if nothing had happened, maintaining his friendly smile. Below the surface, a storm was silently forming. Amy Carson, driven by curiosity and a sense of justice, began piecing together inconsistencies. The more she uncovered, the more it appeared that Marcus Bell's death was no random robbery at all, but possibly a carefully concealed crime pointing back at the very institution sworn to protect and serve. Amy Carson wasn't the kind of reporter who backed down from a tough story. With over a decade of experience covering small-town politics and public safety, she knew when something didn't add up, and the Marcus Bell case was one of those times. As she combed through public records, she noticed a troubling pattern. Several citizens had filed complaints against Officer Hayes in the past 5 years, yet not one of those complaints had gone beyond the initial report. In each instance, the cases were either dropped without reason or labeled as resolved with no explanation. The victims often stopped responding to follow-ups, and a few even moved out of town quietly, leaving no forwarding address. Amy decided to track down the brother of one complainant, a man whose sister had reported being unlawfully searched during a routine traffic stop by Hayes. The brother revealed that shortly after the complaint was filed, his sister's car was vandalized, and their family dog went missing. No direct threats were made, but the message was clear enough. They withdrew the complaint and never spoke publicly again. Stories like this became common as Amy deepened her investigation, and a dark picture started to form: intimidation, cover-ups, and fear woven through a department that outwardly claimed transparency. Things escalated when Amy received an unmarked envelope left at her newsroom's front desk. Inside were several grainy photos. They appeared to show Officer Hayes meeting late at night with a man known to be connected to illegal gambling operations. In one of the photos, a bundle of cash exchanged hands. While the images were blurry, the faces were unmistakable. Amy's hands shook as she studied them. She had something real, now something dangerous. That night, after returning home from work, Amy found her car parked in front of her house with all 4 windows smashed. Strangely, nothing was stolen from inside. Her laptop and camera equipment were untouched. It felt less like a robbery and more like a message. When Amy called the police to file a report, the responding officer barely examined the scene and suggested it was likely a group of teenagers playing a prank. No fingerprints were taken, no questions asked. Amy began to feel what many others had before her: fear. But instead of walking away, she went deeper. If the system was willing to look the other way while citizens were silenced, she knew the truth was far worse than anyone imagined. Public anger surged after Amy Carson released the first audio clips she received from an anonymous source. Though muffled and incomplete, The voices captured on the tape seemed to belong to senior officers plotting tactics to suppress misconduct reports. Social media spread the recordings like wildfire, and within hours, citizens were gathering outside the police station demanding answers. Despite the growing chaos, the department responded with a brief statement denying any wrongdoing and dismissing the audio as heavily manipulated fabrications. Yet, as protesters waved signs and chanted for justice, Amy received another mysterious package at her office, this time containing a small flash drive labeled simply with a black 3. Its contents were clearer and far more disturbing. The file appeared to be an internal video conference between top officials, openly discussing how to take care of whistleblowers and shift blame if anything became public. Amy feared for her safety but recognized she had uncovered something explosive. She shared the new evidence with a trusted independent journalist in another city. Together they agreed that a strategic release of the files would ensure maximum exposure, making it harder for local authorities to bury the truth. In preparation, Amy backed up all her findings onto multiple encrypted drives and distributed them with detailed instructions to colleagues, just in case something happened to her. Meanwhile, the town council announced they would be launching a review into the conduct of Officer Hayes. But many residents doubted the sincerity of this promise, since several council members had received campaign donations from the police union. Just as pressure built to a boiling point, a startling development shook the entire investigation. While scanning old crime scene archives, Amy stumbled upon a closed burglary case from 5 years earlier, originally handled by Hayes. The victim in that case was a retired school teacher whose house had been ransacked. What stood out was a single photograph taken from the scene, showing a distinctive wristwatch that appeared identical to one Hayes had been seen wearing in several official portraits. Curious, Amy located the teacher, who reluctantly confirmed that after her complaint was dismissed, she saw Hayes wearing what looked like her deceased husband's watch at a public event. She was so frightened that she never spoke up until now. This revelation suggested Hayes might not only be involved in intimidation and cover-ups but could also be stealing from victims. With each new clue, the possibility grew that Marcus Bell's death was not an isolated act of violence, but part of a much wider pattern of corruption that stretched deep inside the department's core. Retired Detective Samuel Ortiz had lived a quiet life since leaving the force, spending most of his days tending to his garden and avoiding public attention. That changed when he saw Amy Carson's broadcast exposing the suspicious activities linked to Officer Hayes. Ortiz recognized patterns he had once tried to report himself. Taking a risk, he contacted Amy and invited her to his modest home. Inside a locked filing cabinet, he revealed a collection of photocopied documents he had secretly saved before retiring. Among them were internal memos, incident reports, and disciplinary files dating back more than a decade, all tied to Hayes and other high-ranking officers. These records pointed to repeated investigations that were abruptly terminated with convenient excuses like departmental restructuring or insufficient evidence. Ortiz confessed that he had attempted to pursue Hayes years earlier during a burglary case in which valuables disappeared from evidence storage. His investigation was suddenly shut down, and he was reassigned to a different department without explanation. Having learned the cost of pushing too hard, Ortiz quietly saved everything he could as insurance. Amy took digital scans of the documents, planning to hand them over to lawmakers. She didn't realize how closely she was being watched. 2 days later, as Ortiz crossed the street near his home, a dark sedan appeared out of nowhere and struck him, speeding off before anyone could record the license plate. Ortiz survived, but suffered multiple injuries, leaving him barely conscious in a hospital bed. When Amy tried to visit, she discovered that the hospital had placed him under restricted access, allegedly at the request of law enforcement for his own protection. Suspicions swirled that the real purpose was to prevent him from talking. Around the same time, Amy received anonymous messages warning her to stop or face consequences. Despite her increasing fear, she pressed forward and sent copies of Ortiz's documents to a state senator known for exposing corruption. Soon, the police chief announced his sudden resignation for personal reasons, followed by the quiet dismissal of 2 senior officers. Official statements offered no further clarity, but staff inside the department whispered that panic had taken hold. Morale among honest officers crumbled as they realized how deep the corruption truly ran. Some began to cooperate silently with Amy, leaking further details through untraceable channels. Though Ortiz lay injured and unable to speak, the evidence he had preserved for years was now igniting the most serious investigation the town had ever seen. State investigators swept into town under the glare of national media attention. Armed with the evidence Amy Carson and her allies had gathered, their first target was Officer Hayes's home, a modest two-story house that looked no different from any other on the block. Hidden beneath the basement floorboards, they discovered bundles of unmarked cash, luxury watches, jewelry, and multiple encrypted hard drives. Forensic technicians traced some of the valuables back to evidence rooms from older burglary cases, confirming long-suspected thefts. Word spread quickly that Hayes was facing imminent arrest. Before authorities could detain him, however, he vanished. His patrol car was found abandoned outside a warehouse near the county line with the engine still warm. A statewide manhunt began, with checkpoints set up along highways and police departments across neighboring counties alerted. As the search intensified, more dark secrets came to light. Authorities uncovered a private bank account linked to Hayes in an offshore financial haven. The deposits matched the timeline of several closed criminal investigations, suggesting he had been receiving bribes for years in exchange for destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses. Meanwhile, the police chief's sudden resignation appeared far less innocent than claimed. Internal emails surfaced showing he had actively worked to suppress misconduct reports and had personally approved the erasure of multiple complaint logs to protect Hayes and other compromised officers. Public outrage turned into relentless demand for accountability. Residents called for a complete overhaul of the police department. The governor responded by appointing an interim oversight board and placing the entire department under state control. As officers were reassigned and records were seized, several former colleagues of Hayes chose to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for immunity. Their testimonies unveiled a disturbing conspiracy that extended beyond a single corrupt officer and implicated nearly a dozen officials across different branches of the force. The town watched anxiously as arrests and suspensions climbed. Yet the most shocking turn came 3 months later, when hikers discovered a shallow grave in a remote wooded area 80 miles away. Inside lay the body of a man dressed in civilian clothes, later identified as Officer Daniel Hayes. The coroner's report confirmed a single gunshot wound to the head. With Hayes dead, many feared the deepest truth would remain buried forever. But others believed his death signaled the beginning of something bigger, a promise that corruption, once hidden in the shadows, would now face the unforgiving glare of justice.